Hello, friends, and welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. My name is Scott Cowan, and I'm the host of the show. Each episode, I have a conversation with an interesting guest who is living in or from Washington State. These are casual conversations with real and interesting people. I think you're going to like the show. So let's jump right in with today's guest. I'm sitting down today with Tug Buse, and school teacher with an interesting side project. I'm going to call it a side project. You're probably going to correct me, but I'm going to call it a side project. And so you've got a replica of an 1850s cutter. And I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop because anything I say from there is probably wrong. So how about you give us your backstory, and then we'll get to what the cutter actually is, etc., like that.
Okay. Well, first of all, just so everybody knows, since you talked about the fact that I'm a school teacher, I just wanted to mention that I work at an online school. It's called Insight School of Washington. And if anybody's curious about it or how it works or something like that, there's a good website. All you have to do is Google it.
I'll put it in the show notes too, so they'll be there for.
Okay, great.
They'll be there for people. Okay.
Great.
How long have you been working with the school?
Since 2018.
Okay. And what got you started working with an online school? Just out of curiosity.
Well, it didn't start out that way. Originally, my plan was that I was going to work for a traditional brick and mortar school. And at that time, I lived in Port Townsend. And what I discovered was that there weren't a whole lot of choices in terms of jobs that I was qualified for in that immediate area. So I was informed that there were online schools. I started looking, I started applying, and lo and behold, I got the job at Insight. And so it's a great job, but one of the biggest challenges is trying to expand the world of these students who, in a lot of ways, their world is very small because they're at home going to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that has some great advantages, but one of the problems that it has is that the students sometimes have trouble getting out and experiencing things.
Okay.
So, for example, when I first started to work at Insight School of Washington, I do, well, as we're going to talk about in detail, I do living history.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a living history reenactor or interpreter.
Okay.
And I can talk more about what that means as we go on with the podcast. But I do that with my cutter, which we're going to talk about in detail. But I also do it with Fort Steilacoom, which is in Steilacoom, just south of Tacoma,
Right.
and Fort Nisqually, which is now in Tacoma, though the original location was in what is now DuPont.
So
Washington.
when you say you work with those, are you one of the docents that help do the tours, or?
I have.
Okay.
I have done that.
Okay.
But primarily what I do is I interpret. I think that's the best way to put it. I interpret a person from the past.
Okay.
So when guests come into either Fort Steilacoom or Fort Nisqually, or when they see me in my boat, what I do, and I think people will be able to see the pictures of me, I dress in a period appropriate way. I hesitate to use the term costume simply because of the fact that they actually did have costume clothing.
Okay.
In the 19th century.
Okay.
So the clothing I'm wearing would not have been considered costume clothing at that time. It would have been considered what somebody would have worn.
So what you're wearing right now,
right.
And we're going to take a shot here in a second, but what you're wearing right now, in fact, I'm going to prep everything so we do this like while we're talking. Okay. So
Sure.
what you're wearing right now, snapping a shot for everybody. This is new to us. We're taking pictures during this episode, folks. Is that an actual 1850s era sailor uniform? Is that an appropriate thing? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
What I'm wearing is actually a U.S. Navy enlisted sailor's uniform from the year 1850.
Okay. It's
So what you see that I'm wearing, this is what an American naval sailor who was enlisted, not an officer,
mhm,
but who was an enlisted sailor would have been wearing.
interesting.
It's called a white uh, frock. It was made from uh, a light cotton canvas that was called duck, and then as you can see, it's trimmed in blue,
Right.
with the star and the little kind of bib like thing that comes down here.
Hmm.
And then they had a winter uniform that was made of wool that was navy blue.
Okay.
So this is
My
a
look at
lighter.
it is it looks like it's quite baggy, not because it doesn't fit you correctly, but because it's designed to be baggy. And would think A, I'm not a boat person, and B, I wasn't alive in the 1850s, although I may look like it. It looks like it would get in the way of working. Now, when you take your cutter out, you're wearing garb like that, how uh, does it impede your ability to work, or have you just gotten used to it, or?
No, actually, quite the opposite. If you have really tight fitting clothing,
Mm-hmm.
you can't move the way you need to be able to move when you're on a ship.
Okay. Okay.
So I mean, you're absolutely correct that it's baggy, but it's baggy on purpose.
Okay.
Even though this frock was tailor made for me,
Okay.
this is correct,
Interesting.
because like you had to be able to haul, you had to be able to row,
Okay.
you had to be able to do all the different functions on a ship, and this garment actually works for doing that. I've done all those, like that work, like been rowing
Mm-hmm.
in my boat, set the sail, hauling on the halyards, the ropes that haul the sail up,
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, wearing this clothing.
Okay.
So it actually does work. It's one of the reasons that the front is actually split
Right. Right.
down the middle, so that it like if you expand your arms out, it actually will kind of
Move
move.
with you a little bit. Okay.
Will move with you. Yeah.
So do you have just not, we didn't, I certainly never thought we'd be going down the wardrobe rabbit hole to start off with, but what the heck?
No problem.
Do you have a winter outfit as well? Do you have it out of wool?
Not
Okay.
yet. To have something like this custom made by a tailor
Hmm.
is very
I
expensive,
can imagine.
and uh, I'm a public school teacher, and while my school pays a fair wage
Sure.
for teachers, we don't
Right.
we're not making a
No,
fortune.
no disrespect
So
no disrespect to your school district. Nothing like
no,
that. I totally, okay. Yeah. You're on a public servant's wage.
right.
And yeah, or a public employee, not public employee wage, maybe. Okay. All right. So we'll come back to the uniform, I'm sure. So
Okay.
you online school teacher,
Hmm.
uh, historic, you're working, you do these things. Okay. When we talked on the phone, you shared a story, and I'm going to kind of set the table and hand it back over to you.
Okay.
You were
All
in
right.
second grade when this happened. And
That's
all I
correct.
can
Yeah.
say to you is that most of us, by the time we're in second grade, have already figured out exactly what we want to do with our lives. So I was thinking you're a little behind. I'm kidding you. So you went on a field trip in second grade. Why don't you take it over from there? Because that's where our story really, truly begins.
Yeah, so in 1986, I was in second grade at that time, and a replica of Sir Francis Drake's privateer vessel, the Spanish would say pirate vessel,
Mm-hmm.
it depends on how you look at it, a replica of that vessel came to Everett, Washington, which was near where I lived at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up just outside of Stanwood, Washington, which for our listeners is about 50 miles north of Seattle.
Yep.
And so basically, we were all herded onto a bus, and we were taken down to the Everett waterfront, which is just south of where I grew up, Everett, Washington, where the Golden Hind, this replica, had come in, and they tied up to the dock there, and we all got to go on board and talk with the crew and all that kind of stuff. And most of my fellow uh, second graders could have taken or left the experience except for the fact that they got out of school.
Right.
But I was mesmerized. And I said to my mother, I said, okay, I want to go with them. And she said, well, they're going to sail across the Pacific Ocean. And I said, yeah, I know. I want to be the cabin boy and I want to go with them. And my mom said, no, you can't. You got to go back to school. So, so but on the deck of the Golden Hind replica, when I was in second grade, I I pledged that I was going to build a historically significant replica watercraft, and I was going to interpret history in that watercraft just like they did on the Golden Hind. And so, a mere 37 years later, that dream actually came true.
I got to ask you, before this day in second grade, field trip, Golden Hind, did you ever give any thought about what you wanted to do when you were older? Do you remember?
It was probably something like that.
Okay. So you've always been kind of a history buff. I mean, there's all sorts of, okay. All right, cool.
And you can say nerd.
No, it's in no disrespect. I love history. So there's no disrespect at all. It's more, I just think it's the way you describe this part of the story is in second grade, you were what, 8 or 9 years old.
Yep.
And you want to build a replica at 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
That seems very unusual. That you were that clear on the focus. That's all I'm trying to say. I think it's pretty cool. So second grade, you're making this pledge. You've made it come true. Where did you go from there? In other words, through junior high or through grade school, junior high, and high school, and ultimately college. How did this project marinate over those years?
Well, I got sidetracked by a few things. So I've always loved history. I've always studied it. With a particular focus on American history and particularly the Civil War and earlier.
Okay.
Has always been my real focus. And so when I was growing up, everyone told me, they said, well, you got to go back east because that history, that pre-Civil War history, that's all back east. What I've discovered is that nothing could be further from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the antebellum or pre-Civil War history of what is now Washington State is incredibly rich, and it's maybe not as well documented as the history back east, but it is documented. And what's so amazing about it is it's like this black hole because very few people know anything about it. There are a couple of very brief highlights that people know about, even in books about maritime history of this area. And then other than that, it's just like fast forward until after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I went back east to Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. And any Civil War buffs out there, that was the college of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He became famous for his role defending the Union position at Gettysburg. And I studied American history, and I was going to be a history professor. But then my professors talked me out of it because they said there weren't enough jobs and all that kind of stuff. So I was also interested in films and media, and so I went to film school.
Okay.
In Southern California, I went to film school, and then I ended up teaching. I ended up teaching film, video, and television production for a while. But I really missed the history.
Right.
I really missed that part, and I was even given an honors program at one of the schools, and I was always selecting history books so that I could teach history. So when I moved back to Washington because I wanted to live here, I realized I had to retool my career. So I went back to school. I got my teaching certification in Washington State, and then I started teaching at Insight School of Washington.
Okay.
And one of the big challenges that I ran into was I would say to students, I would say, hey, come to Fort Nisqually. It's lots of fun. We're going to have an event this weekend. And then my students would say, well, I'd love to, but I live in Spokane, so I'm not going to be able to drive. So what I started doing was I made a video tour of Fort Nisqually. It's about 20 minutes long. I show that to my students. And then I dress in my uniform and other clothing I have, and I have objects that I show students like I'm going to show you today,
Right.
and I can teach them some of this stuff.
So let me ask you, let me interrupt you and ask you, what grades are you primarily teaching?
So Washington State history at the high school level is 9th through 12th grade.
It is. See, I didn't have to take 4 years of it when I was in high school, admittedly, a long time ago. In fact, almost I had to take one semester of it, and then the rest of it was optional. It was weird. So you're telling me now that the school system, it's 4 years worth of, that's awesome. Okay.
No, it's not 4 years.
Oh.
What happens is the way that the state curriculum is set up, the students are supposed to take it and pass it in 7th grade.
Okay.
So but it's required to pass Washington State history to graduate from high school in Washington State.
Okay.
So what happens is the students who come to high school, they need to take it for a number of reasons. Some students just didn't pass it in middle school for whatever reason. Some students move in from out of state.
Yeah.
And so therefore they need to take it because to graduate in Washington, they need to have it.
Right.
So no, it's not a 4-year school.
Okay.
It's just, a 4-year class.
Okay.
It's just that students from 9th to 12th grade are in my class because.
Okay. So
right.
you okay. So are those kids, this is broad brush to try to get any high school age kid to be, but are they finding it interesting, or are they, in your opinion, or are they tuning it out because it's the history, it's old, who cares, it's not TikTok? Or like
There's
your video that you did of Fort Nisqually. I mean, that's cool that you did that. I think that's a really wonderful thing to be able to show a student in Spokane or Walla Walla or Bellingham that's going to your school. This is what Fort Nisqually looks like. How are they reacting? How are your students liking this course, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, of course, the opinions of the students range.
Of course.
But for the most part, most of the students I deal with, they seem to relate to me and to at least some of the course material.
Okay.
And like I'll give you an example. One of the things that I've researched while doing the research that I've done is an item that was constantly made in this area by local indigenous people. So, and by this area, I mean I live on Puget Sound.
Okay.
So on Puget Sound, indigenous people made body armor. And they made it out of the hides of the animal that we now call the Roosevelt elk.
Interesting.
And they would double the leather, or sometimes even triple it, but it would stop arrows and even musket balls at a distance. And I was talking about this because I think it's interesting. It's part of the research that I've been doing. And one of my students is a member of a Native American nation.
Okay.
And he was really interested in like Dungeons and Dragons, like he was interested in like medieval stuff.
Right.
And he said, so like I was going to Europe to like learn about armor and stuff like that. And it's like my ancestors were making armor right here. And I said, yeah, they were.
That's cool.
And
that's cool.
Yeah, so I mean, there are things like that. Like there's a couple of students that I have in my current class who regularly stay after class, not because they need help with the coursework, but just because they want to talk to me.
That's very cool.
And so yeah, it's lots of fun.
I had no idea about the indigenous making body armor. That's really quite interesting. All right, so kind of went off track, dare I say, down a trail. You went to second grade. You make the proclamation. You go. High school, get to college, go to Maine, go back, go to LA. Now you're back up here. Why or what happened that you were able to get started on this project for the cutter? What all kind of, it's not like you go to IKEA and buy a kit and assemble it. It's
Right.
Right. It's not like you go anywhere and buy a kit and assemble it. What were your criteria? How did you settle on what you settled on? And then how did you go about the process of getting the project started?
Okay. So earlier, in between 2004 and 2009, I had built a wooden boat. She was a very, very modern boat, put together with epoxy and stuff like that. So very, very modern technology.
Okay.
But at least I had the basic concepts and ideas about boat building down. And at the time I built the boat, I lived in Port Townsend. I now live in Olympia. But at that time, I lived in Port Townsend. And so I went down to the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op in Port Townsend. And my family had done some business with them previously because my nickname of Tug comes from the fact that my family owns a small wooden tugboat.
Okay.
And so we had enlisted the help of the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op to work on the tugboat. And so I went down there and I talked to some people I knew there, and I shared with them the idea of the project. And they were like, okay, sounds good. And so I was introduced to a man named Tim Lee, who is one of their best, brightest shipwrights. But even more importantly, most of the shipwrights at the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op, they've been trained either in, and I will define what I'm talking about here, I promise, in traditional Carvel wooden boat construction, or more modern boat construction, or cement, steel, aluminum, like others. So, okay. So back in the day, if we're talking, 170 years ago, there were basically two different types of wooden boat construction. There was what was called Carvel construction, which is where the planks were fitted together so well that the hull was smooth. So they were basically butted edge to edge, and they were caulked with a substance called oakum and later caulking cotton. And so that the outside of the ship or boat would be smooth. The hull would be smooth.
Right.
And that's a great form of construction if you're talking about larger boats. The problem is it tends to be heavy, and it doesn't do as well when the boat is out of the water. So what I needed for my cutter was the other traditional form of boat construction, which is called lapstrake. And in lapstrake construction, the planks overlap each other. So if you've ever seen like a Viking longship or something like that, or Google it. If you're listening to this right now, you can Google Viking longship. That's the way the Vikings built their vessels 1,000 years ago. The planks overlap, and so the water tightness is caused simply by the wood being fit plank to plank.
Okay.
And so the hull is not smooth. There's the overlapping planks.
Right.
The advantage of that form of construction is that it's much lighter, and the ship's boats do better when they're out of the water, typically. And Tim Lee was an expert on that form of boat construction. And he was one of the few, if not the only, shipwright at Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op that really knew that type of construction, because it's a very different type of construction than Carvel. So with Tim's help and the help of other people at the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op, they actually scheduled most of the work on the boat to coincide with my breaks, because I'm a teacher, so I have time off.
Right.
So we started laying out the shape of the hull in the summer of 2021, and then over winter break 2021, 2022, around Christmas time, I did a lot of work on the boat with them. Spring break that spring, I went down and did a lot of work, and then did some finishing work in the spring and stuff like that. So I worked on every major phase of the boat's construction, but that type of construction requires, to quote my students, mad skills. It really requires incredible skills that I just don't have. And so that's why it was amazing to have Tim there guiding the work, because he did an incredible job.
Now, how long in man hours, how many man hours do you think it took to build the boat?
If Tim and another experienced person had been working on the boat full time, it probably would have taken about a month and a half, maybe.
Okay. All right.
But it was stretched over, the course of a year.
Right. So a month and a half, solid. Okay. So yeah. All right. 500 hours maybe of labor to build it from uninterrupted, if you will. But okay. So we've thrown around the word cutter. I'm going to guess that the vast majority of the listeners don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How about we stop and you explain what a cutter is in this subject?
Absolutely. So, 150 years ago and earlier, ships typically carried smaller boats on board that were used for a number of different purposes. And of course, ships today still carry small boats, but typically they're just for emergencies. They're like lifeboats.
Right.
So the ship's boats back in the day were used for everything from hauling anchors out to drop them away from the ship, to getting supplies on shore, to transporting people ship to ship or ship to shore. And they came in lots of different shapes and sizes. And, they're often referred to as small boats, but I like to call them ship's boats because of the fact that some of them were quite large. For example, a launch on a ship of the line or battleship of the 1850s could be over 40 feet long.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, they could be fairly large vessels.
That's a good size, yeah. Okay.
So typically in the 1850s on a naval vessel, which is why I usually portray a man in the Navy, the launch was the largest vessel.
Okay.
And then below that were the cutters. And cutters ranged in size from the largest ones, which were, about 28, 27 feet, all the way down to the smallest one, which was typically 14 to 16 feet long.
Okay.
And so my little boat is a cutter.
Okay.
A small cutter. She's 16 feet. And so she would have been about the smallest boat that would have typically been carried by an ocean-going sailing ship coming to this part of the world in the mid-19th century and earlier. She could have been on a ship in the early 19th century.
Okay. And so in your research, give me an example. What would a cutter have been used for, say, in our area? Or if there was, what would it be, just to get a couple of guys to shore? Would it have been to bring food back and forth? Or what would have its primary duty have been?
They were used for a number of things. So if we're talking the smallest cutter, like mine, They were typically suspended from davits that were on the back of a ship, the smallest one, because that was fairly easy to do. And then you could lower them very quickly and use them very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, as you said, they were used for transporting people from ship to ship if there's more than one ship, or from ship to shore, so people could get to shore, for light goods, light cargo, things like that. However, there is evidence of people doing extended exploration voyages in boats even as small as mine. So, for example, in 1824, Hudson's Bay Company fur trapper and trader James McMillan, along with a man named John Work and their crews, they left the Columbia River in 1824 in small boats.
All right.
That had sails. Now, there isn't a lot of description of the boats, unfortunately, but they were small enough and light enough that they were able to go out into the ocean, into Gray's Harbor, up the Chehalis River, and then portage the boats overland to Puget Sound, go up Puget Sound into what is now Canada, and do the reverse of that trip. And in order to portage a boat, drag it overland a ways, it can't be very big.
Right, and can't be particularly heavy either. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. Okay. And this was in 1824. Okay. All right. Let's go back to your boat, though. Where did you get the plans, or what was it? Where did you get the data to start building this boat? You just said, for example, in 1824, there wasn't a lot of research, or not a lot of data on the boats that were used for that. Where were you able to find your information?
So in terms of the information to put my boat together, and by the way, I probably should say that my boat's name is Boke.
I'm never going to pronounce that. Can you repeat that, please?
I'll tell you what. So just so you know, the easiest way to remember it is it sounds like the word poke, like I'm going to poke you with my finger,
with a B.
But with a B.
Boke.
Okay.
Why?
Boke.
Why did you pick that name? What's the significance for that?
It's actually Lachute seed. So for those who are listening who don't know, Lachute seed is the local family of Native American languages on Puget Sound, and in the area of Western Washington. And in Lachute seed, the word boke, and it's actually pronounced more like boke. Boke. It means duck, as in the bird. So the story is that, my sailor persona, he rows his boat up to a beach, and he sees a young Native American girl who points to his boat, and he says, "It's my boat," but she thinks he says "boke."
It's my duck.
So the duck, yeah.
Okay, all right.
So that's her name. So, but to answer your question about how did I figure out what she looked like?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had to draw from a lot of different sources because there's a little bit of description here and a little bit of description there and a little bit over here. Doing this kind of research, it's lots of fun. At least I think it's fun. But it's kind of like trying to figure out what a 3,000 piece jigsaw puzzle looks like when you only have 30 pieces. You've got like a collection of pieces over here. You've got a piece over there. You got a piece over there. You got a little bit of the border down here. And so you take a look at that, and then you have to try to guess what the entire picture looked like.
Okay.
But what I will tell you is this. The main document that we used is that the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., they actually have an amazing collection of ship's plans.
Oh, okay.
Historical ship's plans that come from a number of sources. And the system they have is a little clunky, but it works. What you can do is you write to them, and then you send them a check, and they have catalogs of ships plans, and they have civilian ships and warships.
Really?
It's two separate catalogs. And excuse me, in the warship plans, I found plans for Navy cutters from 1854.
Okay.
So then you have to write another check and send that off for the plans, and fill out a form and send it off for the plans. But then eventually they sent me the copy of the plans.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to spread them out on the table and take a look at them. But the problem is those Navy cutters were huge. They were like 28 feet long.
All right.
And so Tim Lee, who was a brilliant man, he was like, okay, I've got an idea. And I said, oh, what's that? And I said, well, you could pay a ton of money and have a naval architect, a person who draws boat plans, redraw the plans from the Smithsonian plans. Or what we could do is we could find a boat whose plans already exist that's similar to this one, and then we'll just alter it, which will save you tons of money. And I was like, okay, fine. So what happened was there's a book out there, which I recommend to anybody who's interested in traditional boat building. It's by a guy named John Gardner, and I think it's called Building Classic Small Craft.
Okay.
And John Gardner is given lots of credit for saving the art of traditional wooden boat building. And anyway, in this book, Volume 1, there were plans for a type of boat that was called a white hull. And white hulls were very similar to cutters. And so what we did was we took those plans from the white hull, we shortened them a little bit, and then the shape of the stern or back of my boat, it's a different shape than the white hull. So we made the back of the boat the right shape, and like the front of the boat, the curve was a little different on the front of the boat, so we changed that and things like that.
Okay.
But that actually ended up working very well, and it probably saved me $3,000 or $4,000.
Okay.
By doing that.
Not an insignificant savings. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So a boat's built. You're working. You're contributing while you're on breaks and all that. So. Where was the maiden voyage?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on how you count it. So just the boat wasn't even completely finished yet.
Okay.
And we launched her in the water at Port Townsend in the marina so that Tim could get an idea of where the water line really was.
Okay.
Because when he saw the boat in the water, he could really get a good idea of where the boat was going to float. And so, and for those of you who are not familiar with boating, boat building, all that kind of stuff, especially if you're talking about a wooden boat, the area below the water needs to be, well, in a wooden boat, you need to put on paint that will keep shipworms from eating your boat. Mm-hmm. So that's one big issue. The other is barnacles and marine growth.
Right.
So there's special paints for the bottom of a boat.
Well, what did they do in the 1850s though? Did they have special paints back then, or do we know? I mean, did they just like put tar on it, or I mean, what did they do in the 1850s?
They did, and they did have paints, and they did use them, and for the most part, they are highly toxic.
Of course they are.
which is why they're illegal for health and environmental reasons today. But
okay, yeah. So we had to make
however,
we made a concession with paint. Okay, all right.
Well, but so now one of the great things about Boke is that she can actually depict a ship's boat from the early 1800s, like early fur trading vessels, all the way to the present, really. I mean, people are still building boats mm-hmm. that look like her today.
Okay.
So she's a time machine. I can slide back and forth through time in her, which is a lot of fun. I originally intended, though, that she would be the ship's boat of the USS Massachusetts.
Okay.
And the USS Massachusetts, and in fact, I can give you a picture of what the Massachusetts looked like.
Okay, hold it. Hang on a second.
You want to?
All right, we're gonna hold it. Okay, we got the photo. Yep.
And so there is one and only one full color illustration of the USS Massachusetts that I found at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia. And the ship's boats were kind of reddish brown above the waterline, and they were white below the waterline. Okay. And so that's the color scheme that we went with. Do we have any idea why? For the boat. So my guess is the white paint on the bottom it was probably a mixture. It probably had some copper in it because shipworms don't eat copper. Okay. And it probably had some white lead in it as well. And then the paint above the waterline was probably what they called tan bark. And tan bark is where they took the bark of cypress trees, like the western red cedar in Washington, and they would boil it down until it was this thick syrup. And if you've ever seen some sails of sailing vessels are even today are a reddish brown color. Okay, that's tan bark. They would. I mean, now we just do it because it looks cool. Okay, but in the past they would dip the canvas of sails in the tan bark because it was a preservative. Okay, it would preserve the cotton. So my guess is that's what happened. Okay.
So what color is your boat? This tan bark and white? Is that the color pattern that you picked?
Okay. Yeah. So above the water it's tan bark, and then below the water is white.
So just out of curiosity, since you're not able to use historically accurate paint for various reasons, what are we painting boats with in today's day and age?
Well, there's all kinds of oil and water-based compositions that are used for marine paint, and some people say there really isn't any difference between marine paint for the top of a boat versus like good exterior paint for a house. Okay, they just charge more for it. I mean, there's a big debate about that. Okay, in the case of my boat. The painting scheme actually presented a huge problem because remember what I said about the shipworms earlier? We needed a copper-based paint to paint on the bottom of the boat because that's the only thing they won't eat through. They won't eat copper. But the problem is there's no white copper-based paint. Okay. So what we did instead was we painted the bottom of the boat with a light brown copper-based paint and then painted a white paint over the top of that, which actually made the bottom look off-white, which is exactly what it's supposed to look like according to the painting. So it was perfect.
Okay, so you've got a copper-based paint on the bottom. Okay, all right. Yep. Okay. So the initial launch was to see how she sat in the water. When was its completion, and where was its maiden voyage, if you will, as a completed vessel?
So, well, again, it kind of depends on how you count it. But when I put her in the water, I rowed across Port Townsend Bay and back. So I went to Port Hadlock, which is at the southern end of Port Townsend Bay, and back. I took her to the Wooden Boat Festival in Port Townsend, which I can tell you a little bit more about later. And then I also took her down to Tacoma because my friends at Fort Nisqually, I wanted them to see her. And so I invited them down to the dock to see the boat. And I was like, hey, I have a period correct 19th century boat here. Let's go for a ride.
Let's go for a ride. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Last summer, I wanted to take a fairly long voyage in her, just kind of to show that I could, I guess. And so my hometown of Stanwood, I mentioned earlier,
Right.
I left from the Stillaguamish River, which is near where I grew up, and I went to Tacoma entirely in this boat by water, under oar and sail. And it took me about a week to complete that voyage.
And approximately percentage-wise, how much of that did you row?
I would say about 30%, 40% maybe.
That's a lot. That's a lot of work. Okay. And how did the adventure go? Tell me more about it.
Oh, it was great. I mean, it was very uncomfortable, and it was very like I had a really period correct experience. I mean, there's no question or doubt about that. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, this is hard. This is really hard work when you're rowing against, like, if there's contrary wind or current. So small boats today, if they have a sail, they're often equipped with some sort of a keel, often that can retract up into a trunk for going into shallow water. Well, the philosophy for ship's boats in 1850 and earlier was, if the wind is favorable, pop in the sail. If it's not favorable, you're rowing.
Okay.
And so that's what I had to do. And so there were times when I had to row into the wind and the current. And there were times when I had to just keep glancing at shore to see if I was even moving forward, in the right direction. But then, so I went from Stillaguamish River to Everett, stayed overnight in Everett. Then the next day, I went to Edmonds. And I was trapped there for a little bit because of inclement weather. And then stayed with some friends. And then I went to Shilshole in Seattle. And then the next day that I traveled, I went to Blake Island, which is an amazing state park. It's an island on the west side of Puget Sound,
right,
somewhat near Bremerton. And I stayed there for a couple days, again, inclement weather. And I had the wind with me that time, so that was amazing. But then the final day was the most impressive because the wind was in my favor all day. And so I sailed from Blake all the way into Tacoma. And I didn't drop the sail until I was basically in the marina where I was going to pull in.
Wow. Okay.
In Tacoma. So that was 21 nautical miles in a single day, which is not bad for my boat.
No, that's a lot. I mean, okay. And your friends from Fort Nisqually, what was their reactions to your boat?
Well, I sometimes have a flair for the dramatic, as maybe you have been able to pick up on. And so I didn't tell them why I asked them to come down to the dock. I just said, well, I'm there in my boat. But I didn't tell them exactly why. So, when they came down, at first, one of my friends was kind of like, wow, okay, you didn't tell us about this. But then she was like, yeah, but, you having a period correct boat from 1850s, well, that's just you. So, okay, let's go for a ride. It's like at first they were kind of surprised, and then they were like, oh, that's just Tug. So of course he's going to have a period correct boat from the 1850s. But yeah, we had a really fun time. We had like a little picnic on the dock, and I took everybody out for a ride in the boat, and rode them around a little bit in Foss Waterway. I was at the dock at Foss Waterway Seaport Museum in Tacoma, which, by the way, and I don't get paid or anything to plug these places, but it's a really cool place, a really neat museum if you've never been there.
I have not been to that one, but yeah, I love it. All right. So what are you doing with the boat? I mean, what's your plans? What's it look like?
Well, so of course, I kind of got the cart before the horse. I built the boat, and then I started looking for a place to take her.
Okay.
Whereas I probably should have done it the opposite way, but oh well.
Where's the fun in that?
Right. Why make it easy?
Right.
So anyway, one of the places that I've taken her is, like I said, the dock at Foss Waterway Seaport, and right now I'm working with Foss Waterway Seaport, the Washington State Historical Society Museum, and the Tacoma Historical Society Museum that are all in Tacoma to try to coordinate it so that when I'm there in future summers, I'm not just talking to people who are crab fishing on the dock, right? And because the boat was just finished last year, really,
right.
was when she was like completely and totally finished. So so there's that. And for anybody listening to me, I haven't been able to lock it down yet exactly when that's going to be, when I'm going to be in Tacoma this summer, but it's probably going to be in late July or early August. So be watching the websites of those museums that I talked about, because they're probably going to promote it. One thing I will definitely tell you is that on Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 11th of this year at 1 o'clock p.m., so 1 o'clock in the afternoon, at the Coopville Public Library in Coopville on Whidbey Island, I will be giving a presentation that's actually about I don't want to give away too much.
Okay, that's all right.
But I'm going to be revealing information that no one has known since the early 19th century.
Okay.
In this area. And the reason I chose the Massachusetts was she was the first American steamship on Puget Sound.
Okay. All right.
And I'm really interested in steam. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. But then it got me to wondering, what was the first American vessel, period, on the Salish Sea or Puget Sound?
Right.
And so that's what this talk is going to be about.
Okay. And repeat that again? The date?
Yes. So it's Saturday, May 11th at 1 o'clock p.m. at the Coopville Public Library in Coopville, Washington on Whidbey Island.
I'll put a link in the show notes for that too. Okay.
Okay, great. And then Boke will be on display. So I guess I should say, depending on how that goes, Boke may be in Coopville and maybe in Oak Harbor, possibly. I might be doing stuff with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm trying to kind of do. You might every couple of years they're going to have a reenactment on San Juan Island of the Pig War.
Okay.
That happened in 1859. It was a boundary dispute.
Yep.
And so she might go up there. I might take her up there for that.
All right.
But for sure, I can tell everybody that at the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival, which is September 6th through 8th. Mm-hmm. So the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival in Port Townsend, Washington, September 6th through 8th. You will most definitely see Boke and I there.
All right.
So,
what do you envision your role in the future with the boat to be? Is just as a way of helping us connect and understand more about maritime in the 1850s range? Or is this the first of a series of boats that you envision? Or I don't know, what's the future look like for this project?
So as we talked about before, I'm a school teacher, and I was very fortunate to have some funds that I inherited from my late grandfather and my late father, which I used to build this boat. Mm-hmm. It's really quite amazing how expensive it is to have a boat like this built. I mean, even a 16-foot boat, it's quite shocking, actually. I mean, if you want it done right. Mm-hmm. I mean, if somebody just cobbles together something and, whatever, but this boat, if properly taken care of, will outlive me.
Right.
And that was the whole idea. So no, I don't anticipate building any other boats right now for the project, because boy, that's a lot of money. So I think I'm just going to take care of, and I'm going to use this one. But I am collecting and making artifacts that I can use to tell stories.
Okay.
And so I either collect originals or I make reproductions.
Can you give me an example
of them, or have them made? Well, I'm going to show you some.
All right.
I hope if we have time.
Yeah, we do. We got time. But yeah, so I'm curious because, well, depending on what the artifacts are, they're not inexpensive. I mean, that they could be, probably not. Nothing. Anytime people collect things, the cost can get prohibitive, no matter what. I collect baseball cards, so even pieces of cardboard can get very expensive very quickly. What got you going on that, on the artifacts?
So believe it or not, there are many, many original artifacts that are shockingly low in price.
Really? Okay.
Well, it's
so you're
stuff
ruining
that people,
it for you. You should be scaring everybody off. You should be saying, "Oh, they're so
right.
so
don't,
they're hard to find
don't,
and they're so expensive."
Oh,
don't even bother.
You better believe it.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the honest answer.
Okay.
Some are expensive.
Okay.
There are some things that are incredibly expensive,
okay.
And there's some things that are incredibly hard to find. It depends on what you're looking for, and what condition it's in.
Right.
So there are certain things, like you mentioned, that are highly collectible, that people have collected for a long time, like baseball cards, or coins. But the thing about coins is that coin collectors are very persnickety, and sorry, I didn't mean to insult.
No,
any
condition.
coin collectors out there. I'm a coin collector.
An 1850 silver dollar could be worth an astronomical range of values depending on the condition of it, and what a collector might consider to be unacceptable, you and I might be thrilled to have. Yeah.
And I'm going to give you an example of that right now. So this necklace that I'm wearing around my neck.
Okay. Okay. Go for it.
We'll get a picture.
Yeah. Let's get a picture. There we go. We have the picture, and it's okay. So it looks like it's copper.
Yes.
Okay.
So copper was consistently an item that was valued by Native Americans on the Pacific coast.
Okay.
And so as a sailor who's out here, if I get shipwrecked, 99 times out of 100, I'm probably going to be picked up by Native Americans. So I'm going to want something that I could potentially trade.
Right. For your life.
For food and shelter. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I have it. I mean, the large copper disc is just that. It's a piece of copper.
Okay.
I have a piece of copper to trade if I need to. The coin, however, that's also hanging from the necklace,
right,
is an 1802 copper 1 cent piece. So it's basically a penny from 1802. It's an American 1802 copper 1 cent piece, and it's an original. It's over 200 years old. But because the condition is not perfect condition, and also it had a hole drilled in it.
I was going to say you somebody drilled a hole in it for your uses.
Not me,
but for your uses that's fine, not for collectors.
Actually, so it just goes to show the old saying, one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Right.
So for coin collectors, that's considered a flaw.
Right.
But sailors often did that. They often drilled holes in coins and wore them around their necks. Because if you think about it, if you're climbing up in the rigging of a sailing ship, anything in your pockets is going to come out.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's a good point.
Right? So why do I have an 1802 penny? Well, come to the talk in Coupeville, May 11th, 1 p.m., Coupeville Public Library, and you'll find out, because that's when I'm going to tell the story of that coin.
Okay.
But I've got other coins as well, and believe it or not, you want me to show?
Yeah, let's see it. Let's do it. Let's get this. This
is the other necklace, and I'll try to show the coins. And
there we go. All right. So that's an interesting. So those are other coins. I would not have from looking at them as you're wearing them, I would not have guessed those to be coins, if that makes sense.
Well, they're not all coins.
Okay. All right.
They're not all coins. So the Massachusetts first came out here in 1850.
Mm-hmm.
And when she was here, Zachary Taylor was president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I know, everybody's favorite president, right?
Well, mine was Franklin Pierce. I went to Franklin Pierce High School. I'm just, it's the only reason I would have known he was president of the United States. Anyway, I digress. I don't think he was a very good man either, now that historically we're looking back. But anyway.
Well, I've actually been fascinated with Taylor and the Mexican-American War for quite a while, but that's a whole nother story.
Okay.
Anyway, so what you see on my necklace, and with the picture, I'll try to go basically from my right to my left.
Okay.
So the blue objects are trade beads.
Mm-hmm.
They were glass beads that were traded to Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest by fur traders. And the ones that I'm wearing are originals. My mom bought them from a Native American antique dealer.
Okay. All right.
So they are originals. The coin-like thing, the first coin-like thing from my right is actually not a coin at all. It's a Zachary Taylor presidential campaign medallion. So if you wanted to vote for Taylor, it's basically kind of like a presidential campaign button. Back in the day, you'd wear it around your neck.
Okay.
And people would be like, oh, okay.
All right.
You're voting for Taylor. The wooden object is actually the propeller of the Massachusetts. I hand carved this pennant that's basically the propeller of the Massachusetts. She was a propeller-driven steamship,
mm-hmm.
which was very rare at that time, but she was. The next object is a coin. It's an 1838 U.S. no star New Orleans dime.
Okay.
So in the year 1838, the first branch mints opened in the United States outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
This was made in New Orleans, and many people think this coin was the first coin ever made at a U.S. branch mint.
Interesting. Okay.
And so why this coin? Well, New Orleans was and still is one of the biggest ports in America.
Right.
And so a sailor would probably have a coin from New Orleans, and this one had a hole in it as well. So the two coins that I've showed you, the combined value of them
mm-hmm.
Was, including shipping, was less than $150.
Okay.
For those two coins. So the penny
mm-hmm.
was like $35 plus shipping. So not as expensive as you might think.
No, not terrible at all.
And then the final object is actually a brass button that has Zachary Taylor on it. It is literally a campaign button. You would sew it on your coat.
Okay.
So they would get these packs of buttons, and they would sew them. The men would sew them on their coats to advertise the candidate that they supported. And so that's the necklace.
That's very cool. That's a cool set of stories. All right. So let me see if I can kind of sleuth together a little bit. Your upcoming talk has something to do about 1802. And you're not going to I'm not trying to get you to disclose it, but I have a suspicion it might be tangentially related to your boat. That's interesting. So where do you store your boat at? It's not in the water all the time, is it? Do you keep it in the water?
No, thank goodness.
Yeah. Okay.
She's on a trailer.
On a trailer. Okay.
And
so, I mean, a 16-foot boat, you should be able to tow on a trailer with a reasonable, a pickup truck should pull it around pretty easily, correct? Okay.
And a fairly light duty one too. You don't need a super heavy duty truck. And
okay.
In fact, I had to shop for a new vehicle, and that was like the number one thing I was telling the dealers. okay, I want a truck that's capable of towing this much weight.
How much,
And
approximately, how much does the boat weigh? Just out of curiosity.
well, actually, I'm glad you asked that question because it's a more interesting answer than you might think.
Okay.
Because she weighs about 250 pounds dry. She weighs about 100 pounds more when she's soaked up water.
That's all? She only weighs 250? Dry.
Yep.
Really?
Dry. So remember I said that lapstrake construction was really light?
Yeah.
And that's one of the main advantages of it is that it's very, very light. But in order to become truly watertight, she has to. So what happens is when I first put her in the water, she leaks.
Okay.
Quite a bit, in fact. So I've got to put her in the water, and then I got to babysit her for a while and mop the water out of her, because it takes at least a couple of hours for her. Because what happens is the wood in the boat absorbs the water and it swells.
Swells up, right? Okay.
And then when it swells, the planks squeeze together, and then they become watertight.
Interesting.
And that's how it works.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's not just quick launch and then away we go. It's like you got to launch and then you got to bail the boat for a while she swells up. But that's
interesting. Okay.
That's how it works. But I keep her in a garage.
Okay.
My mother has been very kind and is letting me keep the boat in the garage so that she stays in really good shape.
Right. And so what sort of maintenance does a boat like this require of you? I mean, she's fairly new, so hopefully not a lot, but what do you foresee the maintenance to be over, the next 5 years?
Well, so you may have heard the old acronym, BOAT, BOAT, means break out another 1,000.
I've heard the other one I've heard, though, is that the two happiest days of a boat owner's life are the day he buys and the day he sells. So, yeah, it seems appropriate.
I'm not planning to sell anytime soon.
Well,
so the routine maintenance on this boat is that I need to flip her over, and then I need to sand and paint the bottom paint, particularly. The tan bark paint on the sides is probably fine for a while yet, but within the next 5 years, that'll probably have to be repainted.
Okay.
And then so what happens with a lapstrake boat is that on the interior of the boat, it creates a lot of little pockets and holes and stuff like that. Because, for example, when you put the ribs in the boat that are the structure of the boat, there are all these little gaps under each plank.
Right.
So it's rare that people will paint the inside of a lapstrake boat because it's really difficult to repaint it. So typically what will happen is the inside of a lapstrake boat, and this has been the case since like the Vikings, for a long time, usually the interior will be oiled. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take her back to the Shipwrights Co-op probably in June after school gets out. And then Tim has got one of those garden sprayers, that you spray weed killer with, stuff like that. But what he does is there's this type of oil it's a mixture, and it's usually referred to as boat sauce. And I'm trying to remember what's in it. Linseed oil, Japan dryer, some tar, a bunch of stuff. And anyway, he pours it into the garden sprayer, pressurizes it, and then he'll spray it so that it gets inside those little crevices.
Okay.
And then you even it out with a paintbrush, and then you mop it up. And that's really important that you do that every year, because if the planks dry out, then they'll start to crack.
Right.
Which, as you can imagine, is very problematic in a boat. If the planks start to crack.
Yes, it would be bad. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got 4 questions for you as we're going to wrap this up. Okay, so 4 questions. Number 1, what didn't we talk about that we should have talked about? I mean, we can keep going here. So, but what didn't we talk about?
Okay, so I would like to give you my email address in case anyone wants to know what's going on with the boat, because at present, I don't have a website. That's going to change. I'm going to build a website eventually, but like I said, I kind of got the cart before the horse. So I'll give you my email address.
And I'll put it in the show notes as well. Okay.
Okay. And then, let's see, I think I covered pretty much everything that.
Are you
that
on social
I wanted to cover.
media? Do you have any social media accounts that have more information?
I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook. If you look, I think it's Michael Buse.
Okay.
My real name.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I can be communicated with through there.
Okay.
At present, I don't have a website for the project specifically, but again, that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
I've been dealing with the logistics of just keeping the boat afloat.
Right. Right. No.
For the first part of it.
Oh, it's gonna be something, right.
Right.
Okay. So what's the email address?
It's my name, my nickname, which is Tug, like to pull or tugboat, and then my last name, which is B as in boy, U as in umbrella, S as in Sam, and E as in elephant at gmail.com.
Okay.
All together and all lowercase. So tugbusey@gmail.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. You ready for the 3 questions? Okay.
Go ahead.
Number 1, I'm a coffee fan. Where's a great place for me to get coffee around you?
In Olympia?
Yeah.
Oh,
give a shout out. I didn't prepare you for these. Oh, this will be fun. I did not prepare you for these 3 questions. Well, audience, here we go. So are you a coffee drinker?
I am.
Okay. All right. So where's a good place?
I tend to make my own because I can be persnickety about how I like my coffee. Okay. And also, by the way, coffee was often listed in naval stores ahead of ammunition. They really wanted coffee in the Navy. But ever since I was a child, I went to the tugboat races with our tugboat in Olympia for Harbor Days.
Right.
And my family would often eat at the Spar Cafe, which is on 4th Avenue in Olympia. Yep. Famous old restaurant. And now it's owned by McMenamins, and so the menu is different than what it was when I was a kid. It was just a classic diner when I was a kid, but it's still a good place to go, and their coffee's good.
Okay. All right. Question number 2. You might be giving me the same answer. I'm getting into Olympia around lunchtime. Where's a great place to go grab lunch?
Well, there you go.
Okay.
There's a Spar. I mean, there are lots of great places in Olympia.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I know up 4th Avenue, I think there's a really good bakery up there. I'm trying to remember what the name of it is.
Okay.
There's a restaurant that's kind of catty corner from the Spar that it's called like Oars or Rowing or something like that. They've got like oar blades.
Okay. Yeah. I'm
have
kind
of
visualizing it, but I'm drawing a blank on the name. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Here's the last question. You have to answer this question. You can't pass, and you have to give me your reason why too. All right. This is very important. The whole episode. Okay. The success of the episodes right now.
Okay.
Cake or pie, and why? Oh, folks, he's got that. He's pondering looks. So some people it's really easy. Some people it's not. What do you got?
And I understand full well that I cannot give the answer I like both, right?
That is correct. Yeah, sorry. That answer is unacceptable to the judge.
All right. I'm going to go with pies, and the reason I'm going to go with pies is because they were more often made and served on the frontier if you're talking about cake as in a dessert.
Okay. Which we are, but okay, your point, historically, you've got a point. You're valid there. So you're going to go with pie. What type of pie?
Well, okay, so in that case, I have to answer that. In that case, that's an easy answer, though it's not period correct because I don't think there was any out here at that time. But rhubarb. I'm a huge rhubarb fan. Love rhubarb pie, rhubarb strawberry pie. Any pie with rhubarb. I don't think rhubarb was available in the 1850s in Washington, so I don't typically have that as a living history interpreter.
Interesting. But the reason I say interesting is earlier today I recorded an episode. Okay, so today 2 examples. Last couple of guests have also said rhubarb. So I've had this run of rhubarb aficionados. It's it's really interesting to me. And the same thing I've been saying for a few episodes now, I'm going to get to it. I just haven't. As long as I've been asking this question of people, I should be keeping track of the answers, right? So there's this running that, is pie in the lead? Is cake in the lead? Blah, blah, blah. I do believe pie is in the lead. And I'm going to say right now that there has been a strong run on rhubarb. And I don't know, is it the time of year? Is that, I wonder what it is. It's like rhubarb is rising up. Okay.
However, since you asked the question,
yes,
I am going to say this in terms of period food.
Okay.
If you're talking about non-sweet cakes
Mm-hmm.
or sort of sweet cakes that are not for dessert but for like regular eating,
Mm-hmm.
those were very common. So at the time, they would often call what we would now call flapjacks. They would call them flat jacks, which is what they are.
Right.
They're flat, right? So eventually, the consonant got changed to flap.
Interesting.
Flapjacks, but they were flatjacks, which are a form of cake. There were these simple breads or cakes that people would make out here. The famous American, like quintessentially American thing in the early days was what they called Johnny cakes.
Mm-hmm.
Or journey cakes, and they were made out of corn, usually like cornmeal. I mean, often very simple ingredients: cornmeal, water, and salt. Often was, all that they were really.
Yeah.
And those were very popular, and those were eaten an awful lot. Now, in the Navy, corn was actually not issued as a regular staple. And my guess is because I think corn flour tends to mold or mildew more than other grains. However, the Massachusetts had cornmeal on board. And the reason she did was she got it in California before she came up here. And so it's possible that there were Johnny cakes, cornbread, that kind of thing on Puget Sound on the Massachusetts. And by the way, I will say, the first newspaper that was ever published in what is now Washington State was called the Columbian, and it began publication in September of 1852 in Olympia. And the earliest recipe for a food product that I've ever been able to find on Puget Sound, there was a recipe for cornbread that was printed in the Columbian on August 13th, 1853.
Interesting.
And it's a very simple recipe, but if it's made well, it's not bad.
Okay.
And I've made it many times, and it's really kind of precious because it's one of the few recipes that we can be reasonably certain people actually made here in the 1850s because it's in the newspaper.
That's interesting. Awesome.
Right.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I know we could keep going on, but for sake of being respectful of everybody's time, we're going to cut this one off. I'd like to have you come on back, and I'd like to talk Washington history with you one of these days, if you'd be willing to do that. Maybe give maybe give us a high level overview of the class that high schoolers have to pass before they can graduate, and see how many of us could actually pass these days. It'd be really kind of fun to see. But thank you so much. This is really cool. And I'm really glad that you're taking the time and making the effort to do this and share it with the public and help people understand a little bit more about life in the 1850s in our area, and what in the Washington Territory at that time, or would we still have been the Oregon Territory at 1850? That's where my Washington history is struggling. At the
1853 was when Washington broke off from Oregon.
Okay, so 18. So yeah, okay. See, I wouldn't have passed the class if I would have gotten a bad grade. But the point is, I think it's really interesting because the state does have, as do a lot of all our country has interesting history, but I'm a Washingtonian guy. We have a really fascinating history here, and I think it's really great that you're trying to help shine a light on it. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
So can I do one last thing? Can you take one last picture?
I will, yes. Okay. What am I looking at before I click on this? What is that?
It's what's called a dead-eye block.
A dead-eye block, okay.
And it's basically a pulley.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure I had a really perplexed look on
It's
my face when it comes up here in a second. Oh, I did.
A ship's pulley that ropes would go through.
Okay.
There's supposed to be 3 eyes, and of course it resembles a skull,
Right.
which is where the name comes from. But you can see that I put copper sheeting on it.
Oh, when you hold it differently, now I see it's a pulley. The way you were holding it before, I didn't see the groove. Okay, got it. Now,
do you want a picture?
Yeah, let's do that because I was confused. And okay, so do you put the copper on that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's see how that one. Okay.
So I plugged one of the holes.
Okay.
This Deadeye rattle is really worn out, which is why they retired it. It's an original. I don't know how old it is, but it's an original because I made it into a rattle.
Okay.
And that kind of thing was done by sailors all the time. And I wanted to use it because it's something that people can hear.
Right. Very cool. Well, Michael, thank you so much. Or Tug. And actually, I want to, after we hit stop, I got a question for you about the tugboat. So we'll leave that. So Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show. You can reach me on Twitter at ExploreWaState. I'd love to hear your comments. You can also visit our website at explorewashingtonstate.com. If you know anyone who would like the show, it'd be amazing if you'd share the show with them. This is the biggest way that we grow this show. Good old word of mouth. Glad you were here with me today, and I hope to have you listening to the next episode. See you then.